Green tea has become widely popular due to its many touted health benefits. Many of us are drinking green tea from the grocery store, and if you were asked, well, what is your favorite type of green tea? You'd be a little confused. Well, actually, there are hundreds of varieties of green tea, and that doesn't even include all of the blends or the flavors that are also offered. So if you'd like to learn more about the different flavors of green tea, then join us today right here at Rebecca's Tea Cozy. Welcome to Rebecca's Tea Cozy, where we share a love of tea and other things that are cozy to nourish our bodies and our souls. In this series of Let's Talk Tea, we're describing the variety of teas that all come from the Camellia sinensis plant. There are 6 different teas, and they're categorized based on the level of oxidation and/or fermentation. Today, we're going to focus on green tea, which is green because the oxidation process has been halted. Right after plucking, green tea is heated, which deactivates the enzyme that reacts to the oxygen in the air, causing it to turn brown. A brewed green tea is usually either green, light yellow, or a pale brown in color, and its flavor can range from grassy, like toasted, to vegetal, to a sweet floral finish, to even a taste of umami, such as seaweed. There are hundreds of varieties of green tea, and they all bring a unique flavor and color profile. The flavor of the tea is based on how it's processed, the terrain where it's grown, whether it's grown in the mountains or closer to the equator, whether it's from the sinensis variety of the tea plant or whether it's from the Assamica variety of the tea plant, what season it's picked in, what it's grown near, the process that's used to create the green tea. So there are so many factors that go into that flavor profile. And it leaves a variety of options for us to choose from to enjoy all of the many health benefits as well as the flavors of green tea. In front of me, I have a few different green teas just so you can see that there are many shapes and sizes and ways to process the tea. These 3 teas, green teas, are from China, which is the top producer and consumer of green teas. This is the tea that is most often enjoyed in China, and in fact, some will say that if you say tea in China, it's automatically going to reference a green tea. The second country most well known for its production of fine green teas is Japan. This is a Japanese green tea, and China and Japan are both well known for their green teas, but they use a different process to create their green teas, which in turn creates a different flavor profile that is very distinct between the 2 countries. Now, as we make any generalization, we know that not all tea in China is produced the same versus all tea in Japan being produced the same. So of course there will be some overlaps. But in general, there are 2 distinct processes, one used in China and one used in Japan, that determine the flavor profile of these green teas. And in today's episode, we're going to talk a little bit more about those differences in processing and how it impacts the flavor of the teas from these countries. Before we get into actually tasting and comparing the teas from China and Japan, let's talk a little bit about the overview of the processing for green tea. Last week, I shared these cards of the stages of tea production, and we talked about how each tea is processed differently, which creates the end result, in this case, green tea. So let's review those stages of how green tea is made. First, all tea is plucked. The quality of the tea will be determined based on the intentionality of the plucking stage. So if it's 1 leaf in a bud, or 2 leaves in a bud, or whether it's more mechanically processed, which means it's just sheared, and you might get 4 or 5 leaves per bud. So the more intentional the plucking process, the higher quality the tea will be. Green tea may or may not go through a withering stage. Of course, it's going to wither to some extent because the farmers are going to pluck it and then transport it back to the processing area. So there will be some withering involved, but whether there's an intentional withering stage or not will depend on the maker of that tea, and it will also impact the final flavor. Green tea is going to immediately be fired right after plucking and a possible small withering stage in order to halt that enzymatic process, which allows the tea to oxidize. This is the key stage that makes green tea different because it goes from plucking to almost immediately firing, which keeps it green. After firing, then there's going to be a rolling stage, which helps shape the leaves, and it might go back and forth between a rolling and firing process until the tea comes to the point that the tea maker is happy with the shape, with the size, with the appearance of that tea. And then finally, all tea is dried to reduce the moisture content down to a very small percentage so that it can be stored and packed and shipped to consumers. So now let's begin the tea tasting process. We're going to look at 2 teas today. One tea is Essentia green tea, which is a primary tea in Japan. And the other tea that we're going to look at today is a Dragon Well superior tea, which is a well-known green tea in China. So let me clear some of these things away, and then we will begin the tea tasting process. Green tea is considered to have originated in China, and again, it's the primary tea that's consumed there. Japan is the second best known country for green tea, and it's said that Zen Buddhist monks who had traveled to China and returned brought back with them the tea plant to be able to cultivate it back at the beginning of the 7th century. Originally, tea was known for its medicinal properties and primarily touted for that, but over time it became better known to help with focus and concentration, as well as just for pure enjoyment. So we're going to brew these 2 types of teas, and then we'll talk a little bit more about the stages of green tea processing in China and the stages of green tea processing in Japan, then talk about how those flavor profiles are impacted by that process. So just a reminder that when we're brewing green tea, we want to use a water that is cooler than that boiling temperature that we would typically use for black teas. So again, that ranges typically around 165 to 185 degrees Fahrenheit or around 70 to 85 degrees Celsius. That will get you in the general ballpark to make sure that your green tea doesn't taste bitter or too astringent, and that it brings out the best flavors for that tea. So I'm going to check the water that I've heated, the temperature, and I've put 3 ounces of tea in both of our tasting cups, and we're going to brew the tea, and then we'll talk a little bit more about that. So I'll be back with you in just a moment. I've brewed both teas at around 175 degrees Fahrenheit, and we're going to compare now the typical Chinese green tea process compared to the typical Japanese green tea process, and notice some of the differences that come out from that. Typically, the Chinese will pluck the leaves. They may have a withering process, which is more likely in China than it is in Japan, and then they're immediately fired. But in China, they use more of a pan firing process. So it might be a large wok or other type of metal pan or a basket or a metal drum that's rotated. And so it's processed over a fire and the leaves are constantly manipulated over that fire until they're ready for the next stage of processing. Alternatively, in Japan, the primary process for halting that oxidation process is not roasting or pan firing or baking, but it's steaming, which creates a completely different flavor. So while you get a more grassy or toasted flavor from Chinese green teas, the Japanese green teas will have more of a floral or a little sweeter or even an umami flavor. And that depends on a variety of factors, but one of them is how long the tea is steamed for. So the less steaming that the tea goes through is going to have a lighter, cleaner finish. And the longer that it's steamed for, it's going to have more of a full-bodied or an umami flavor. Think seaweed. Then the teas are gone through a combination of rolling and firing and rolling and firing. They might go through a roasting process over charcoal or something else that will give it a specific flavor. And then, of course, they're dried. Now, they're rolled in different ways, and that's what you can see in the Dragon Well tea, which these are rolled out to be a flat leaf. Whereas in the Japanese green tea, these are rolled into almost like a needle shape. You'll also perhaps notice how vibrant green this tea is compared to the Chinese green tea. And that is one of the characteristics that steaming does versus that pan firing. So it retains more of that bright, vibrant green, which is also evident in the color of the liqueur. So typically Chinese teas will have more of a pale yellow or almost a brown hint to the color of the green tea, whereas Japanese teas are more likely to have a vibrant green color to it. And again, that's because it's steamed versus pan fired or baked. When you compare the wet leaves as well, that's also just as obvious. So you'll notice the Dragon Well leaves, you can see the flat shape now that they were pressed into. And you can see on this side how those needle rolling has opened up their leaves more, but these are still definitely a brighter green compared to this, which has more of a dull green appearance. So let's now taste the teas and actually see what their flavor is. This is the Dragon Well Superior from China, which is pan-fired. It has a roasted flavor, which is really nice. Kind of grassy, a little bit earthy. Almost a richer flavor, kind of like you would find when you're thinking about coffee, where it's that roasted taste to it. But it still has a much cleaner, lighter flavor than what you would find in a black tea that's been allowed to oxidize through that process. It's very vegetal tasting, so it makes you feel like you're enjoying something from the earth that's fresh and clean. And now let's try the sencha tea from Japan, which was steam fired. This tea definitely has more of a vegetal flavor. It doesn't have that deep roasted taste to it. It's brighter and a little cleaner. A little more like a spring flavor, which adds to that bright green look to the tea. So there are a variety of countries that have started producing green tea, but again, the two best known and longest producers of green tea are China and Japan. And because of the distinct process that each of them use, it creates different flavor profiles within the tea. Now again, there are hundreds of green teas, varieties that originate in China, and they all will have a unique flavor. as I shared at the beginning, the several different types of green teas you saw on the plate. And so I encourage you to try a variety of green teas, whether from China, Japan, or other countries that are producing them, to explore all of the nuances of the flavors that can come out based on the processing that the tea goes through, as well as the area in which it's grown. We're going to look at 2 additional unique green teas, just to look at a few other ways that it can be processed and enjoyed. Before we concluded our journey into green tea, I wanted to share 2 additional teas that have a unique characteristic about them to show the wide variety of teas that are available. This tea is a jasmine pearl tea, which originated in the Fujian province of China. And there are many different types of scented green teas, but this one is jasmine pearl, which means that it's been rolled into little balls. And so this is one of the rolling styles that can be used. And the really cool thing about jasmine scented teas is that it goes through a long process of laying the leaves out and putting a bunch of jasmine flowers in and just letting them sit in together so that the leaves absorb the flowers. Then the tea producers have to come pick out the flowers because they've exhausted their scent. And then they go pick a new bunch of flowers and put them in and allow that scent to be absorbed. And that process may be repeated 5 times or additional multiple times until the tea producer has reached the scent and aroma profile that they desire. So it's a very tedious process. And then in addition to finally rolling the tea into little balls. So this is such an enjoyable tea, and it's a much healthier alternative because it's been scented with flowers, which is a natural product from the earth, versus chemical or artificial flavorings. Some lower quality teas, you'll see lots of little flowers in with them, which it's not really scenting at that point. It's more for decoration. So you truly want to, for a higher quality tea, make sure that it's gone through that scenting process and that there haven't been additives put into it. Now, matcha tea is another green tea that has become very popular, especially in the health community. And this one is unique because it's actually a powdered tea. So the tea leaves are dried and then turned into a powder form. Although this particular matcha tea is from China, most commonly matcha tea is associated with Japan, and it's an important part of many Japanese tea ceremonies. So you'll see a special bamboo whisk and bamboo tool to scoop the tea into the vessel, and it is then whisked into the hot water and drunk without straining it out. And so it creates a frothy, creamy type tea, which has a very unique flavor. Now, the other unique quality about matcha tea is that it can also be added to smoothies or sprinkled on salads or foods because of its powdered form. So it allows a little bit more versatility than the typical tea leaves. So speaking of health benefits, green tea is most commonly drank by individuals who are looking for a lower caffeine content. Now, there cannot be a blanket statement, as we know, because caffeine is determined by a lot of different factors. However, typically green tea is considered to have a lower caffeine content. And the other interesting thing, not just about green tea, but about teas in general, is because of the compounds that are in them, the caffeine is absorbed into the body at a much slower rate than coffee. So while coffee is consumed and goes immediately into the circulatory system, which creates a more intense alertness, whereas tea, because of the compounds, releases it into the central nervous system, which allows for a more gradual intake of the caffeine as well as a more gradual decline. So tea is more unique than coffee with its caffeine in the sense that it allows you to typically feel more focused, but yet still calm and relaxed at the same time. One of those characteristics that you'll hear a lot about is L-theanine. That's one of the compounds that are in tea that allows for that calming and relaxing feeling, even though there is caffeine in the tea. Other health benefits that are widely talked about are the antioxidants, which of course help prevent disease. There is a lot of research out there to support that drinking green tea is beneficial to your health. Now, like everything, drinking it in moderation. Hopefully today you've learned something new about green tea. And if you're one of the people who would say, what kind of green tea do you drink? And you'd think green tea is green tea, then you're encouraged to branch out and try some of the different types of green tea, specifically that you can find in more loose leaf varieties. So I encourage you to continue to expand and explore your passion for tea and continue to join us each week right here for a standing reservation at Rebecca's Tea Cozy. Until then, be blessed with a cup of tea.